Live from London, this is Global Business.
Hello, welcome to the programme. I'm Jamie Owen.
And I'm Paul Barber. Our top stories. Beijing calls on the EU to delay its planned tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to allow time for talks.
Our other headlines: Apple's App Store squeezes out rival marketplaces. European Union regulators say the tech giant has breached new laws.
A full honour guard and 21-gun salute. Presidents of China and Poland meet in Beijing.
And a fire at a South Korean lithium battery factory kills at least 22 people, most of them Chinese nationals.
China and the European Union have agreed to hold talks to try to solve a trade dispute over potential new tariffs on electric cars.
Tensions had risen between the two following the EU threatening to put additional levies of up to 38% on Chinese electric vehicles coming into Europe. The move follows an investigation launched by Brussels into what it claimed were illegal subsidies given to Chinese electric vehicle manufacturers. Beijing has warned that adding tariffs could trigger a trade war. Well, let's talk to our correspondent Will Denslow in Brussels. Will, what have European leaders said about these talks?
Well, over the weekend, we had a video conference between China's Commerce Minister and the Trade Commissioner here at the European Commission behind me. Off the back of those talks over the weekend, there will be technical talks over the coming few days. Now, China have maintained that the potential for tariffs would be protectionism, pure and simple as they see it. As far as the European Commission is concerned, well, they warn that Beijing has been flooding the European market, or they allege that that is the case, with cheap subsidized electric vehicles. So that is something, a huge issue that the two sides are going to try and need to get close together to avoid the prospect of these tariffs coming into effect on July 4th. Interestingly, for several European countries who are particularly vulnerable to this, considering a number of European manufacturers rely heavily on their EVs being produced in China, such as many German automakers. We've heard from the German leader Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor in Germany, who says that he needs to see serious movement and progress on the Chinese side. As far as the EU is concerned, they said that talks were constructive, but they will not provide, as they said, a blow-by-blow of the technical talks over the coming few days.
Will, we're going to do more on electric cars in just a moment, but while we've got you, I just want to talk about this Apple story while you're in Brussels, because the EU has accused Apple of breaching its new tech rules. What are they saying?
Jay, this all relates to the Digital Markets Act that was passed back in 2022, but it was only in March that big tech firms that were really seen as the gatekeepers for things like app stores, that they were forced to start complying with this European Act. And as far as the EU is concerned, they believe that Apple may have breached the DMA, as it's referred to. And some officials here at the European Union have likened it to a football game where one team is locked in the changing room and isn't allowed to participate. That is what they're accusing Apple of doing, and there could be some incredibly substantial penalties if indeed by next March they're still viewed to not be complying with the DMA. It could result to Apple being fined up to 10% of its global annual revenue, so a huge chunk of change for Apple. It does have the right to respond to review these concerns by the European Union. Apple, for its part, has come out and saying it is taking steps to comply and is now fully in compliance.
Will, thank you for that. Our correspondent Will Denslow in Brussels.
Well, let's talk a little bit more about these tariff discussions with Husuk Lee Makiyama, Director of the European Centre for International Political Economy. Welcome back to the programme. Good to see you. Thank you very much. So China and the EU are going to talk. What do you think these discussions will focus on, and what would a successful negotiation look like for each side?
Well, the truth of the matter is that EU may not be 100% aligned when it comes to these tariffs. Of course, there are countries like France and Italy and Spain who are actually keen on putting some leverage or pressure on China. But it may not necessarily be that they actually want to see a tariff. They actually want to see other kind of concessions from the Chinese side, including more investment, foreign direct investment into new plants, preferably in their own country, of course, but also some transfer of technology and also better market access inside China.
And Germany has been quite critical of these tariffs. How does that reflect the broader China-EU relations?
Well, Germany has been something of a latecomer to this party because they have been very busy and occupied with internal issues, not least the dwindling popularity rate of Chancellor Olaf Scholz may play into this as well. And it's not only, it's actually in the last 2-3 weeks that Germany has actually woken up and realized that this could actually hurt the future sales prospects of major companies like Volkswagen, who sell almost 1 million cars per year in China, compared to, if you look at BYD, the Chinese brand, who sells maybe 3,000-4,000 cars in Europe per year.
And so just to expand on that, what are the potential ramifications of tariffs for both EU and China in the electric vehicle market in particular? What kind of impact could it have on consumers and businesses?
Truth be told, the direct impact is very, very small. Chinese Chinese market don't actually sell that many cars in Europe. Among the 10 million cars that are sold in Europe every year, around 0.1% are sold by BYD, NIO, and other Chinese marques that we've come to appreciate. But the truth of the matter is that the majority of the sales that come from China is actually Teslas. And so half of the market is actually held by Tesla. So this is just as much a beef between Europe and China. It is also something of a beef between US shareholders and the European consumers.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and on the American side of things, the US has imposed even higher tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles. How do you see the EU's approach differing from the US, and what lessons could it learn from the US-China trade dynamics? And of course, we're just hearing that Canada potentially is considering measures including tariffs.
Oh, I'm pretty sure that there are many people who are all of these 100% tariff that the Biden administration has imposed, and they have been imposed on the grounds of non-compliance with international rules on a presidential executive order. And these are legal instruments that are actually not available in Europe. And in Europe, these countervailing duties against Chinese subsidies have to be agreed among the member states. There has been investigation. And if the investigation actually don't hold up to a decent legal and technical standard, China will, I'm pretty sure, challenge them in court. And they have a propensity to win, even in European courts. This is perhaps the big difference between the legal basis that has been deployed by the United States, which is somewhat more arbitrary than the European system that is 100% under rule of law.
Hossuk Lee-Makiyama, always great to get your analysis. Thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
The relatively high cost of electric vehicles remains a big issue in terms of persuading people to buy them. Trying to convert older vehicles to electric has so far also proved rather costly and impractical.
But one company says it has a solution, at least when it comes to buses. Our correspondent, Li Zhenhua, reports.
Breathing new life into aging bus fleet, stripping out the old diesel engine, replacing it with a new electric motor and battery. The transformation looks rather straightforward.
All we do is we remove the engine and gearbox and replace it with a new power skid that has a battery pack and the electric driveline assembled into it. So it's a very quick process. From a vehicle arriving on site as a diesel vehicle to it leaving as a new power vehicle takes 3 weeks.
Wrightbus is a company based in Bicester, about an hour's drive from London. It says it can convert about 500 buses a year at a cost of about half the price of a new electric bus. More than 34,000 diesel buses are thought to be operating across the UK.
Every single diesel bus that is replaced by an electrical bus reduces CO2 by 74 tons a year. 40,000 litres of diesel that are avoided convincing the complete population to switch to electrical cars will take much longer than decarbonizing bus transport.
The UK government has provided some funding to help local authorities switch to zero-emission buses. Similar measures to decarbonize public transport have also been rolled out in China, the European Union, the US and India. And this means business for companies just like Wrightbus.
This is a huge market. I mean, in terms of the electric bus market globally, it's projected to increase to $30 billion by the end of this decade. And it's growing at a rapid rate. It's about 20% a year growth. And you see it's an enormous market in terms of reaching net zero in transportation for many countries.
By 2035, sales of new vehicles with internal combustion engines will be banned across the UK, which means more electric vehicles on the road. As the number of electric vehicles grows, so does electricity demand. According to National Grid, a significant surge in EV adoption will increase the electricity usage by up to 30% by 2040. And more investment in the energy infrastructure will be needed to ensure the success of these retrofitted buses. Li Jianhua, CGTN, Bicester, England.
Prosecutors in the United States want to bring criminal charges against the global aviation giant Boeing over its handling of crash settlements.
The Department of Justice accuses the plane maker of violating an agreement to pay $2.5 billion in penalties and compensation to people affected by 2 fatal crashes involving its 737 MAX aircraft.
Well, let's talk now to our correspondent John Terrett, watching events for us in New York. John, just talk us through the details, if you would.
Well, Jeremy and Paul, first of all, I think we have to give credit to our colleagues at the Reuters news agency who came up with this over the weekend as an exclusive story, which now everybody is picking up on. And it is that U.S. prosecutors have, according to Reuters, recommended to the Department of Justice in Washington, D.C. to seek criminal charges against Boeing and its management team. Now, the background to this, if you remember, in 2021, so that's 3 years ago, Boeing was found guilty of defrauding the authorities in America. They did pay a fine of $2.5 billion. But within the framework of that agreement, there was never to be any criminal prosecution against management if they kept their nose clean, as it were, for 3 years. So no jail in prospect at the moment for anybody who either has been or is running Boeing. And this is all related to the Lion Air crash of 2018 in Indonesia and the Ethiopian Airlines crash of the 737 MAXs in Ethiopia in 2019. More than 300 people dying in those 2 events. Well, now, according to Reuters, the criminal prosecutors and the federal authorities here are saying that deal back in 2021 is voided. And the reason is recent mishaps and missteps by the Boeing Corporation. Now, it is reported that the Department of Justice has until the 7th of July to make up its mind about whether it will prosecute Boeing management or not. That's about 2 weeks from now. You will remember on this program we reported last week that families of the victims of Indonesia and Ethiopia are pressing the authorities here to fine Boeing $25 billion. It seems to be a different number every time you read it. And that's partly because the fines that they have paid up to now, they've written off against tax, which is perfectly legal, but in many ways, you might say, arguably is a little bit immoral. Now, the other thing is it may be that the Boeing management are not prosecuting. That may be what the Department of Justice decides. It may be that they tighten up the 2021 deal. But I know that the authorities in Washington are dumbfounded that Boeing, 3 years after that deal was put in place, according to them, has yet to fully put into place the terms of that deal. In other words, they accuse them of failing to design, implement and enforce. Would you mind? We're live on the air. I'm so sorry. Thank you so much. Design, implement and enforce compliance of that deal from 2021. So you can see this is once again Boeing making headlines for all the wrong reasons.
John, I know you're surrounded by lots of people on a busy floor, but I'll persevere if that's all right, and just ask you to talk us through how on earth this huge company gets to a place like this.
Well, this is the question, you know, that everybody is asking themselves, because Boeing really was, certainly in North America, a very much loved corporation. It's funny, I was attending a friend's birthday party yesterday at a bar in New Jersey, and this man has been retired from Honeywell, the instrument maker, for 26 years. And before he left many years ago, he'd invested in Boeing when the share price was just $2. And he was lamenting to me how he's being killed now on the share price all these years later, because, of course, it's down so much from its high. We'll get to that in just a second. And I mention that to you because it's just proof that ordinary Americans are aware of what's going on, and they certainly care about it. Now, basically, last week, David Calhoun, who is the CEO now, apologized to the families up on Capitol Hill. You saw that. It really all relates now to the Alaska door blowout back in January of this year. And various whistleblowers, including one last week, continue to come forward to say there are issues with the MAX and also the 787 Dreamliner. And only today, one of our producers in London pointed out, only today it's being reported that Boeing knew about a helium leak on the Starliner capsule, which is now at the International Space Station, which they can't bring back because there are leaks on board and they can't quite work out what to do. It's another example of Boeing being unable to get ahead of itself. It's been mismanaged for years. They moved the headquarters from Seattle to Chicago. They were chasing the share price. They have these suppliers all over the country. They've lost control of the suppliers, and they were allowed to do their own safety checks by the authorities here. And the problem is, and I'll wrap up now, don't worry, but the problem is there are only 2 commercial plane makers in the world. You know, there's Embraer in Brazil, we know about that, but it's much smaller. China's having a good crack at it, we know that. But really, it's Airbus and Boeing has almost single-handedly thrown this out the window for themselves. And airlines are desperate to get hold of jets that they've paid for, but which Boeing can't deliver at the moment. And the share price, though, ironically, is up 2% at the moment, though it is down 30% in the year to date. Guys?
John, good to see you. Thank you for that. Our correspondent, John Terrett, in New York.
Europe's biggest travel company is beginning its week trading solely in Germany for the first time since its shareholders voted to delist from the London Stock Exchange. In February, more than 98% of TUI's shareholders backed a proposal to drop the London listing, denting that market's standing in global finance. The company argued axing the London listing would simplify its structure and improve liquidity.
The German insurer Allianz has become the first foreign company to own a stake in China's pension insurance company. Allianz has acquired 2% of newly issued shares from Guomin Pension, valued at more than $31 million. Guomin Pension, established 2 years ago by China's largest banks and insurers, aims to promote the country's private pension market.
Argentina's first quarter GDP and unemployment data are due out later, and what will be the first economic figures released since President Javier Milei was elected. The country's far-right leader has enacted controversial public sector cuts since taking office in December as he attempts to rein in Argentina's triple-digit annual inflation. The moves, such as laying off tens of thousands of civil servants and cutting fuel and transport subsidies, have sparked protests.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead, Israel's Prime Minister says fighting in Gaza is entering a less intense phase as exchanges of fire with Hezbollah in Lebanon stoke fears of a wider conflict.
Ever wondered what's the difference between a bear and a bull market? Where are the cash cows? And who are the lame ducks? And what exactly are black swans? Grey rhinos? And unicorn companies? Make sense of it all with Global Business, only on CGTN.
I think it should be more global cooperation.
I would like to hear more the voice of the developing countries.
Globalization has lifted more than 1 billion people out of poverty.
The green transition has to happen. It's a necessity.
Well, China and the United States are important powers in the world.
What unites us is much more than what divides us.
And I believe China is committed to this agenda.
Join me, Juliet Mann, to set the agenda at these times every weekend on CGTN.
Events have consequences. Words create impact.
One more offensive in a long line of battles that's been ongoing for more...
Just got to be careful here with some gunshots. Excuse us.
The world today matters for your world tomorrow.
The number of casualties is growing quickly.
This is one of the hardest hit towns in the region.
The world today, every day on CGTN.
And welcome back to Global Business Europe. At least 22 people have been killed in a fire at a lithium battery factory in South Korea. China's embassy in Seoul says 17 Chinese nationals are among the dead. One person from Laos was also killed.
The fire, started by an explosion, has been largely brought under control. Our correspondent Jack Barton reports.
The aftermath of what is thought to be the deadliest blaze ever at a South Korean chemical factory, this one producing lithium batteries. Most of the victims are thought to be Chinese citizens. But the investigation into who was killed is being hampered by the scope of the fire.
There are Chinese nationals and other foreign nationals. Like I said before, about 20 workers are foreign nationals, but the list of them was burned, so it will take more time to check their exact nationalities.
South Korea's president and prime minister personally inspected the site. The country's foreign ministry says it will closely cooperate with diplomatic missions to support the victims and their families. A worker who escaped the inferno reportedly told firefighters an explosive combustion occurred in one battery cell. Fire officials say that rapidly spread to more of the roughly 35,000 batteries thought to be stored in the factory at the time.
One of the biggest problems for the fire crews here is that a lithium battery fire cannot be put out with the usual water-soluble foams. In the end, they've resorted to dry sand.
The focus now is on identifying the victims. Once that's completed, attention will no doubt turn to how the fire started and spread so quickly, and what can be done to prevent a tragedy like this from happening again. Jack Barton, CGTN, Hwaseong.
Professor Paul Christensen is a lithium battery expert at Newcastle University in the UK.
Lithium-ion batteries store a very large amount of energy in a very small space. So that makes them great for storing renewable energy, for example. The sun doesn't always shine, wind doesn't always blow, but you need to feed into the grid. So you store the energy and then feed it in when it's needed. But it's a double-edged sword, this high energy density, as it's called. If that very high energy gets out in an uncontrolled fashion, then you're in trouble. And what you must understand is that with lithium-ion batteries, and I'm not sure if this was a lithium-ion or a lithium metal primary battery fire, lithium-ion batteries, you get at least 500 litres per kilowatt hour of explosive and toxic gas when they go into thermal runaway. That means you've got that huge volume of gas inside the batteries, and when it gets out at very high pressure. So if it ignites immediately, you get rocket-like flames. Hence, you can get very rapid spread of the fire. If it doesn't ignite immediately and ignition is delayed, then you can actually get what's called a vapor cloud explosion. And that, in many ways, is much more dangerous than fire. But this is unique. Essentially, if you put the fire out, you switch the hazard from fire to explosion, because you essentially can't stop thermal runaway going from cell to cell.
That's a very, very vivid image of the rocket-like flames. And as an electrochemist yourself, you've consulted for government and advised businesses about the safety of these kind of batteries and the way they're stored. You know, how risky are they, and what can be done to mitigate that, and what could have caused this kind of disaster that we've seen in South Korea?
Well, the first thing, I think it would be wrong to speculate about this terrible disaster with this really large loss of life. Until we know more facts, I think we should not make comment. But lithium-ion batteries are inherently, they're not unstable. I mean, basically, Everybody has lithium batteries all over the place. There are billions in this world. And essentially, lithium-ion batteries don't commit suicide, okay? They are murdered. And that means there is a human factor. And I don't mean, malpractice. I mean it's a lack of understanding, a lack of training, a lack of education. Everybody, every single person that has anything to do with lithium-ion batteries, and that's basically everybody in the United Kingdom, should be trained in how to not to abuse them, how to use them, how to dispose of them safely. And that goes to first responders, people working in the manufacturing facilities, etc. Now, as I said, I cannot speculate what caused this terrible disaster, but in general, it's some form of abuse, either crushing, heating, overcharging, over-discharging, or it can be down to manufacturing defects introduced at the very early stages. But as I've said, in most cases, it comes down to some form of human error.
The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says fighting in Gaza is entering a less intense phase, which would allow Israel to deploy more forces to the northern border with Lebanon.
Let's talk now to our correspondent, Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv. Jonathan, what did Prime Minister Netanyahu have to say?
Basically, what Netanyahu was saying is that the very big stage of the Israeli army basically taking over the entire Gaza Strip, that is coming to an end, as Israel, according to Netanyahu, was able to put down or destroy almost all of the Hamas fighting force, all of the Hamas battalions, and from now on there still will be fighting in Gaza, but it will be conducted differently. Smaller forces will come in and go out, come in and go out time and time again, based on intelligence. Let's hear actually how Benjamin Netanyahu put it in his words.
After the intense phase is finished, we will have the possibility to move part of the forces north. We will do this first and foremost for defensive purposes, and secondly to bring our evacuated residents back to their homes. If we can, we will do this diplomatically. If not, we will do it another way.
So what Netanyahu is saying is that from now on there will not be a need for such large forces in the south, and there will be a possibility of mobilizing them north, because as according to the Prime Minister, the conflict there has to be solved one way or another, preferably the diplomatic way, but since that is not seen anytime soon, then a military option may also be on the table.
Israel's Defense Minister Yoav Gallant is in the United States. What can we expect from that visit?
It's exactly for that purpose, for the possibility of a war in the north, that Yoav Gallant is in the United States. Israel understands that a war with Hezbollah is a completely different story. The capabilities held by Hezbollah are completely different than those held by Hamas, and Israel would need all of the assistance it can get, both diplomatically and, of course, militarily, for such a campaign. That is why the defense minister is in the United States, trying to make sure that Israel will get all the assistance, in his case, mostly the military assistance when it comes to a war in the north. We've heard a lot of criticism coming from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, saying that the United States has been withholding some weapon shipments. Gallant comes to the U.S. with a different message, saying that Israel understands and appreciates the great support it gets from the United States, and also to make sure that support continues if and when a war breaks up in the northern border, because then again Israel would need all of the American assistance it can get.
Jonathan, many thanks for that update. That's Jonathan Regev in Tel Aviv.
Well, the European Union says it's increasingly concerned about an imminent expansion of this conflict into Lebanon.
Last week, Hezbollah threatened to target Cyprus if it allows the Israeli military to use its airport.
The risk of this war affecting the south of Lebanon and spilling over, it's also every day bigger. We are strongly concerned. I hope that the ministers will support our initiative and continue reaching out with our partners in order to look for a strong international support for a ceasefire.
Several medical workers have been killed following an Israeli airstrike that hit a clinic in Gaza City. Our correspondent Akram Al-Satari is in Gaza.
In the last 1 hour or so, 6 Palestinians were killed. 3 of them were killed in the beach camp in the Gaza area, in the eastern Gaza area. 3 others were killed in Bani Suhaila area in a bombardment that took the life of the 3 in Khan Yunis area, in the east of Khan Yunis. The situation continues to be extremely tense in Rafah, where the Israeli occupation continues to destroy whole residential blocks as part of the ground operation that has never slowed down but is still continuous, despite the fact that the statements that were made by the Israeli occupation Prime Minister Netanyahu foretell that there is going to be slowdown in this operation to launch and start the third stage in sometime very soon. However, the bombardment is still continuous. The number of houses that are destroyed is also very high, and whole residential blocks were wiped out, and people are still getting shot and injured by the unmanned drones fire that has been hovering all around the different encampments in the western Rafah area and western Khan Yunis area, and causing widespread death and injury among those people. The latest incident of that was the incident that took the life of 2 Palestinians and injured 37 others last night. According to the Palestinian Minister of Health, around 500 Palestinian health workers were killed, and around 310 health workers were arrested by the Israeli occupation forces. They concluded in a statement that they published and distributed to the media that around 64 health facilities were rendered out of service because of the ongoing bombardment and targeting of those facilities, and 160 health facilities were targeted in total because also of the ongoing situation and because of the reckless way of a treatment that has been conducted by the Israeli occupation. Also, the UNRWA made a statement that around 191 UNRWA staff were killed.
20 people have been killed in a string of attacks in Russia's Dagestan region, with gunmen targeting churches and a synagogue. Police were also targeted, and there were gun battles in the streets, with authorities saying it was a coordinated terror attack.
5 gunmen are reported to have been shot dead. At least 46 people are injured. 3 days of official mourning have been declared in Dagestan, a predominantly Muslim republic in southern Russia, neighboring Chechnya. Well, our correspondent in Moscow is Dasha Chernyshova.
The death toll could actually increase because we understand that several law enforcement officers are still in the critical condition in the hospitals. That's according to the local authorities. We do know to this moment that at least 15 officers have been killed as a result of 2 almost simultaneous terrorist attacks in the Dagestan region. Now, we know that on Sunday night, the shooters have attacked 2 Orthodox churches, a synagogue, and the police checkpoints in 2 cities, in Derbent in Dagestan as well as in the regional capital of Makhachkala. The counter-terrorism operation has been introduced in this region, with at least 5 gunmen being eliminated shortly after. But the understanding is that to this moment, the local law enforcement officers are still looking for the sleeper cells and the accomplices of those who could have been helping the perpetrators of this act of terrorism. The Russian Investigative Committee now says that the central headquarters is in charge of the probe. They are looking into the motives, and they have opened the criminal case under the Charter of Terrorism, but also they are looking into the theft and possession of weapons. These are the most recent developments with regards to the investigation. So certainly there are many questions as to who could be behind this act of terrorism, but the Russian authorities insist that those responsible will be brought to justice.
In the past, Vladimir Putin has said Russia is not a target of Islamist terror attacks because of its unity and multiculturalism. But this isn't the first such attack, is it?
Well, that's right. Just 3 months ago, Russia has seen an awful act of terrorism carried out against the Crocus City Hall, where at least 140 people have died. The Islamic State outlawed, and Russia has claimed responsibility for this act of terrorism. Now, the Russian officials are saying that the goal of these acts of terrorism that have been committed in Dagestan was to sow discord among the multicultural, multi-ethnic and multi-religious society in Russia, but also in the Republic of Dagestan, which is itself a very complex region. Keep in mind that those attacks took place on Sunday when Russian Orthodox believers celebrate Holy Trinity. Took place at the two Orthodox churches, synagogue, in a predominantly Muslim region. So all those factors have to be taken into account, and certainly the Russian society is looking for more clarity as to who could be behind, because so far we haven't had any confirmation as to whether the terrorist organizations, international ones, could be behind this attack.
You can get the highlights from the week's news in Europe and China direct to your inbox from CGTN's Storyboard email newsletter. You can sign up at europe.cgtn.com/newsletter.
You're watching CGTN. Still ahead. Who's flying high? Passengers vote on the world's best airline.
What do we mean when we talk about the difference?
Brazen acts.
The difference is in the detail, the background,
Defense ministers from
the wider angle and perspective of every story, wherever the story may be. CGTN. See the difference.
We are all connected. Across borders, across continents, connected by ideas, a shared humanity. Stay connected.
Welcome back to Global Business Europe with Jamie Owen and Paul Barber. Our top stories. Beijing calls on the EU to delay its planned tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles to allow time for talks.
Our other headlines: Apple's App Store squeezes out rival marketplaces. European Union regulators say the tech giant has breached new laws.
China's President Xi Jinping has met his Polish counterpart, Andrzej Duda, in Beijing. The two leaders discussed expanding trade, with Poland hoping to boost tech cooperation with China. The conflict in Ukraine was also on the agenda, and China announced a 15-day visa-free policy for Polish citizens.
Well, Poland has expressed its concern about the EU's proposed tariffs on Chinese electric vehicles.
Yes, the country has a flourishing car parts industry, heavily dependent on exports. Our correspondent Johannes Pleshberger reports from Warsaw.
Debates on whether imposing tariffs on Chinese cars is justified are not only happening between Brussels and Beijing, but also on Europe's streets.
I think that we must protect our industry, because Chinese industry, when everything will be produced in China, we don't have the job.
Protectionism that could make EVs more expensive.
If I would buy electric car, for me is price. The main thing is price.
Higher tariffs on Chinese EVs could not only hurt European customers' wallets, but also the continent's car industry. Poland, for instance, is one of the world's top 10 exporters of vehicle parts. And these tariffs could have detrimental effects, industry representatives are warning.
A trade dispute could lead to a breakdown in supply chains, which could then lead to less demand for Polish manufacturers, says Tomasz Bebno, who represents Poland's automotive industry and is a board member of Europe's Association of Automotive Parts Producers.
The last thing we need right now in Europe is trade war with China, because it would affect heavily if some retaliations measures are taken. It will probably affect our industry, our supply chains, and we will be hurt.
While parts of Europe's car industry are warning against imposing new additional tariffs of up to 38%, the EU says tariffs are necessary because of China's subsidies to its electric vehicle producers, which Brussels deems unfair. China denies its competitive edge over electric vehicles are a result of subsidies or unfair practices. Officials claim the development of its clean energy industry is driven by advantages in technology, market and supply chains. Unless the EU and China resolve this dispute, the tariffs will become mandatory starting from July 4th. Johannes Pleshberger, CGTN, Warsaw.
Qatar Airways has been voted the world's best airline. The company edged out last year's winner, Singapore Airlines, to claim top spot for the 8th time at the World Airline Awards. Emirates, Anna All Nippon and Cathay Pacific all made the top 5. The rankings were determined by a worldwide satisfaction survey of passengers from more than 100 countries. Well, let's talk now to Paul Charles, the chief executive of the travel consultancy, the PC Agency. Paul, good to see you. I'm always pleasantly surprised when an airline doesn't lose my luggage. What were the key factors that led to Qatar being selected as the best, given there were 350 rivals?
Yes, this is the Oscars of the airline world, and essentially the Skytrax Awards are picking out those that really are at the top of their game. Qatar Airways, as you say, 8th time it's been a winner. It was 2nd last year. It's come up trumps again. And thousands of people who take part in the vote, essentially, for Skytrax, are saying that they've got what it takes, that they are the ones who, time and time again, deliver the best quality, the highest standards, and deserve to be number one.
With strong competitors like Singapore and Emirates consistently ranking so high, how does Qatar maintain its competitive edge?
Yes, I think Singapore Airlines, who were first last year, will be a little bit miffed, actually, that they haven't been able to hold on to this. But Qatar Airways have been working extremely hard, especially since the pandemic, at ensuring they are putting enormous investment into the quality of service on board. So are Singapore Airlines, but Qatar Airways have done a lot recently, such as ensuring their food menus are the best you can get in the air, that their aircraft are the newest you can get, especially the A350s, the Airbuses they're flying. And also, I think one of the reasons that they've won again is the fact that they employ something like 70 different nationalities of cabin crew. And to be able to bring those together to create a united and cohesive culture among 75 different nationalities on board is really impressive. And so I think they can truly take the crown of being a global carrier.
It's textbook example, though, of excellence in management, isn't it? I mean, Qatar has this enormous global network. We're not just talking about half a dozen lines here. It's a global network. I mean, how does an airline manage to maintain such excellent service across all its routes?
They fly, indeed, to over 170 different destinations. That is a huge network to keep your standards up on, to keep flying high. They've always had really good senior management. They, of course, had a change of chief executive last year when Akbar al-Bakr stepped down, and so they've had a change. But he's always led a very strong leadership team at pushing the highest standards. And I think the award today is the culmination of those hard years of work in ensuring that they just deliver the best training. And it's a key hallmark of Qatar Airways. Their training standards are really high. They've invested huge amounts of money in that training and, of course, in the aircraft itself. And everything seems to come together. And when you're a passenger, whether you're flying business or leisure, you expect the highest standards these days. And Qatar Airways keep delivering in spades.
It's Asian and Middle Eastern airlines that consistently collect the top prize. Why is that? And what are the European and American airlines perhaps getting wrong?
It's a really good question. I think a lot of it is down to the sheer DNA of many of the people who work in Asian carriers. They're often from the region. They've been, trained well. They have in their DNA a sense of wanting to deliver the best service. They are naturals at hospitality and quality hospitality. And I think in Europe and the US, that simply isn't generally the case. You have to be trained much harder to deliver the highest of standards. It's not in the DNA. And so American and European carriers, whilst in some cases deliver exceptional standards of service, simply don't have it across the board in their service quality on board. Whereas Asian carriers have, for many decades, delivered high-quality service. And that really shines through in these awards.
Paul, good to see you. Thanks for your time. Paul Charles, Chief Executive of the travel consultancy, the PC Agency.
China has issued its first red alert for heavy rain this year, a day after a landslide killed 8 people in Hunan province. The railway and metro system have been partially suspended in Changsha, the capital of the province, after it was inundated by record rainfall. Rain is expected to intensify in 7 provinces in southern China this week, affecting hundreds of millions of people. The number of Hajj pilgrims dying from extreme heat in Saudi Arabia has risen to at least 1,300. Riyadh reported that more than 4/5 of the dead did not have a permit to make the pilgrimage to Mecca, with half of them coming from Egypt. An intense heat wave has pushed temperatures above 50 degrees Celsius.
More than 100 million Americans remain under heat warnings after a week of record-breaking temperatures there. A so-called heat dome is now expanding to reach parts of the west coast. Our correspondent Popple Mputing reports.
Americans have been sweltering under extreme high temperatures for days as the official start of summer arrived last Thursday. Here in Washington, D.C., the temperature peaked at 100 degrees Fahrenheit or 37 degrees Celsius for the first time in 8 years. About 15 million people have been under a heat warning, the highest level, with another 90 million under a heat advisory across states including California, Arizona, Texas, Louisiana and Florida. In states like Ohio, Pennsylvania and Maryland, the humidity is making it feel hotter. As temperatures begin to cool in some parts of the country, the East Coast corridor from here in the capital, stretching north to New York and New Jersey, is still baking. State authorities have opened cooling centers in places like libraries and recreation centers for people who don't have air-conditioned homes. New York City health officials said heat-related emergency room visits last week were 500% higher than the average day in June. Health experts are warning Americans to stay inside in cool, air-conditioned environments, drink plenty of water, and wear loose-fitting clothing. These extreme temperatures increase the risk of dehydration, breathing problems, and heat exhaustion, especially for people with chronic illnesses and disabilities, according to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The scorching weather is expected to continue as the heat wave heads south towards the Carolinas and Alabama this week. Poppy and Puting, CGTN, Washington.
And you're watching Global Business Europe, still ahead. A masterpiece reborn as ballet meets acrobatics in London.